When I moved to New York City in the last half of 2010, Skrillex and Bon Iver were getting really popular. Not surprisingly, a lot of people who were hiring bands wanted a more electronic direction or a more ambient folky direction. Guitar hadn't really re-entered the pop sphere yet, so for a long time I would hear, I want guitar, but can you make it sound like not a guitar? That was quite literally a request, and I heard it more than once. So if I wanted to work, I had to play guitar in a way that sounded a little less typical. And here are some of the techniques that I used and still use if I want to take a more ambient approach. If you like what you see here today, please subscribe. It really helps me out. I really appreciate it. And let's continue. So being a Jeff Beck fan, I knew there were a few tricks of his that I could rely on, namely whale sounds. I did this a lot. It's where you roll the volume knob all or most of the way off, so there's no pick attack, and then after picking the note, swelling the volume up. One added technique to make it a bit more of a whale sound would be to bend the note that you're playing, and then when you're swelling the volume back up, releasing the note. Both of these examples have had generous amounts of reverb and delay, and in certain contexts, that's not always the route to take. It can sound a bit too epic or grand or whale-like for the verse, so you might want to use a more normal amount of reverb and delay for the verse, or go full on the other side and use a completely dry signal. If we want to create a bit of an unexpected and very present sound, going with no reverb and delay or just a very little bit amount of it might be the way to go. That may sound like weird advice, but because we're not playing typical guitar, we need to think of our effects and tone in an atypical way. The next technique would be bells. These are also like whale sounds, but they're harmonics. If you swell into the harmonic, it can still sound like some sort of sea creature, but if you don't, so you hear the pick attack, then with all that reverb and delay, it sounds like the ringing of an epic bell. The only thing tricky about this approach, and really any approach that involves lots of delay and reverb, is to play very accurately. If you flub a note, you're just going to hear it over and over again at whatever delay time you set your delay at, so make sure to play very deliberately. This approach to using harmonics is pretty simple if we stick to the 12th, 7th, and 5th fret harmonics, but it's a good excuse to try to learn some scales using harmonics, as well as the harmonics up each string. When you play harmonics up the string, they can get a little out of tune, so it's best to add some vibrato, do the neck shake thing, so it adds an effect and doesn't stand out awkwardly. I spent a lot of time with these approaches, and after a while started to feel a little bit bored and like I was always doing the same thing over and over again. So I got to thinking about how I might incorporate chords into this more ambient approach. I found that for me, there was a pretty huge difference in sound and application between closed voicings and spread voicings. If the song was calling for more of an Americana, folky, country approach, I would generally use closed voicings. When played with volume swells and bends, this approach can kind of sound like a pedal steel. The spread out voicings, however, sound a little bit like outer space to me. It's a little easier to use tensions in these kinds of voicings as it just makes for a more outer space sound. Now, whether it's with single notes or chords, another thing I like to do to create a less guitar-like sound is to roll the tone knob almost or all the way off. So you can see what I'm talking about. I'll play those outer space spread voicings with the tone knob at 10 and then the tone knob at 0. As you can hear, it's a pretty different vibe, which leads to another opportunity. Playing our standard lower register voicings up 12 frets can make for an immediately surprising and interesting sound, and one I like to do often with rolling the tone knob down or off. But here's both approaches. Having your toe knob rolled down leads to one more cool opportunity. Often I'll hear a piano like shred some arpeggios and it sounds gorgeous, we all love it, but when I hear a guitar do it, especially a typical sounding guitar, it kind of just sounds like out of place shred to me. Maybe it's just because of the kind of guitar playing I heard growing up, but I know I'm not the only one who feels that way. With the toe knob most or all of the way down, these shred arpeggios to me become more of a possibility. When I hear it, it almost sounds like a keyboard part or something, which is the whole point. As you may have noticed, these approaches just use reverb, delay, and the guitar itself. These requests to make guitar sound like not a guitar came at a time in my playing history when all I had was a delay pedal, a wah pedal, and 2 overdrives. Not exactly a big board for creating soundscapes. It ended up informing my playing to this day, however, because whether I'm using the Fractal or a pedal board or whatever, I generally don't use a lot of effects. There's a handful of times when I would plug into someone's more extensive pedal board, dial in a cool sound, and then accidentally hit a knob or something and not be able to get that sound back and just go, forget it. Basically what I'm getting at is that's my problem, and if you wanted to add a bunch more effects to these approaches, I'm sure you'll end up with some awesome sounds. For me, it's kind of a fun challenge to try to create a surprising sound using a relatively simple setup. I enjoy the comfort knowing that I'll be able to recreate those sounds pretty easily. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you all next week.